And so we want to invite you into information about what is happening in your Lory Student Center. And we are very much looking forward to bringing up Dr. Mike Ellis to help us do that. Let's give it a hand. As he's coming up, I want to check in with Rachel. Speaking of feedback, how are our Zoom folks doing? Do we need anything to change or shift? Can hear everything? That's great. Thank you. Mike.
Good morning. All right, I feel like I should be in a costume. How many of you are new within the past semester, new to CSU? New as an employee. Let's see hands. So you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. So I wore a costume one time for shape, and then it was an expectation and a tradition that I continued to wear a costume. And my last costume was a pickle costume. And, frankly, I decided I can't outdo that today. So I'm known as the Pickle Dude, so people didn't know my name. They would say, hey, the Pickle Dude just visited our office, and I'm okay with that. So let's forget about the costume. Want to welcome you all this morning. Want to especially thank Braden and Emily. Braden for your coaching and your guidance in this, and for being a partner with us. And Emily and Rachel. Rachel, please raise your hand with where you're at and all the work that you've done in preparing. Derek is sitting in the back working sound on the floor. We've got Nate up outside the booth here, and Ashley helped. So, and we've got event planning and lots of folks who put time and effort into this, including catering and our environmental services. And so good to see all of you making a commitment to this program. So let me tell you a little bit about where I'm going to go. It's called a State of the Student Center. Could be a State of the Union address. Many of you know that college unions and student centers, the terminology is used interchangeably and sort of mean the same thing. There's some folks who will debate that and talk about a student center actually is a little bit different and that refers to place. But if you really think of a college union and that ability for folks to come together to create a sense of community, it is a State of the Union update on what we're doing. So what I'm going to do is discuss a bit about purpose beyond our mission statement. I think we all have a good sense of what our mission statement says, or we should. It's 24 words. I think Mo and the leadership of that group as part of our Mission 2020 committee who worked on that mission statement for us. And so we'll go a little bit beyond that. And I'm going to do a brief history of where the Student Center's been, where we're headed, and talk about all the space in between and how that makes a difference in how we serve students. So we'll be looking forward, backward, all around us, all at the same time is my hope. And let's have some fun with this, okay? I don't want to talk at you for 90 minutes. So just kidding, that's not the length of the State of the Union update. But I do want to make sure we have time for questions at the end of what I'm going to offer you, which is really a picture tour of the Student Center and where we've come from and some of the lessons learned. So in the center of your table are note cards, and what I'd like for you to do is each one of you take one of those note cards and grab a pen as well. And at some point, my hope is to collect from every single one of you here something that you've written on that note card. And it may be in the form of feedback. These are things that I missed in discussing history and where we're headed. And it may be things that you really liked. So I call that appreciative inquiry, so that I'll keep talking about that. So write those things down as well. And then on the other side, if you want to just put questions, I will take questions at the end of the session. And if I can't get to those in this session, then we'll use those for what we're describing as our informal gatherings that will begin in the fall again. We used to have informal Fridays. We've heard loud and clear that we'll move to either an informal Thursday or informal Friday. We'll do it a couple times for those who work different shifts. So we'll use those questions to help drive some of the content that we'll discuss as a part of that once a month gathering that we'll do here in the Student Center. So sound good? I'm going to have a couple photos in here. It is entirely appropriate for you to laugh. And so you can laugh at me, you can laugh with me. I just don't want Emily to laugh. So I did give her a preview of this so we could get her laughter out of the way, I hope. So sound fair enough? So let's have a little fun as I take you on a picture tour. So when we look back over the past couple years, we have been through a tremendous amount, right? I'm only going to say the pandemic once. And it's not behind us, and we are still coming out of it. And we know that from business and traffic and the Student Center and the impact that it continues to have on people around the world outside of Fort Collins. We've also had lots of changes in leadership. And the one stable factor that we've had is leadership in Dr. Blanche Hughes. So she's one of the few vice presidents who has not changed, so we're grateful for her leadership and the stability that she's offered there. So at times, we've been headed in the wrong direction. We've had to take a turn that we didn't expect. We've had to slow down. We've had to look up for skateboards crossing the plaza. Right, it's just been a very, very challenging time trying to play within the rules that we're given. We try to challenge those rules and try to think about different ways that we can better serve our students. It's all of that at the same time, right? Confusion, and we're still moving forward. So with this, I want to begin with a huge thank you. If you don't hear anything else from me this morning, I just want to say thanks for what you've done in navigating the tough times that we've been through. The Student Center is in great shape. Financially, we've had a lot of ground to make up. We have lost over $25 million during the last couple years, and this year, had we not done a transfer to cover the increased cost, I'll talk about that in a bit, for our Phase 3 renovation, we would have nearly broke even. And so we've intentionally moved some funding aside to be able to do what we wanted to do as a part of that Phase 3. And I'm not grateful enough to all of you, and I don't say it as often as I should. So know that both Dr. Hughes, myself, and our leadership team are grateful for the work that all of you have done in keeping us running and getting us through the last few years. So I noted our mission in the 24 words, and what I want you to do is look at the red dot. And what I want to talk about, and hopefully you'll hear as a theme, is beyond our mission, the sense of purpose that we have in working in a student center or a college union. And that purpose is about ensuring that every single student, and I would add staff, our career staff, our faculty on campus, in some way feel connected and feel that they belong on campus, which is ultimately the purpose of what we do, and it comes out of that mission statement. And that sense of belonging is, right, it's something you feel, it's in your gut, it's something you see when you walk into a room, right? We've all experienced it when we know we don't feel like we belong. And so everything that we can do to help every single student feel connected at CSU ultimately is our purpose and why we do the things that we do. So, and hopefully you'll hear that that's what we're after when I talk about looking ahead. So I'm going to go through probably 20 or so slides. I think a number of you probably saw the historical exhibit that Doug Sink had placed on the on the north side of the Student Center, outside of the what then was the North Ballroom. And so we'll look to have, as a part of our branding, more of this historical story that we'll tell. But I want to go back just a bit and give you a sense of how the Student Center has changed over the years. So many of you know that the first student union on campus was Johnson Hall. It was first approved in 1932, and it was pushed through by students who assessed themselves a $9 fee, which was sort of the beginning of student fees and led to legislation that drives how we talk about student fees in the state of Colorado, actually across the country. And Johnson Hall opened in 1936 and then had a second edition in 1950, and Johnson Hall continues to this day. So that was our first student union, and it remains a special place on campus for me when I think about the history of the Lory Student Center. So, right, would you all agree with me that the changes that we've seen, all change is good, right? Feel like we ought to be changing? Yeah? Feels okay? Okay. All right, so some of you know our Chancellor, Tony Frank, right? Change is good, right? Okay. All right, this is when Dr. Frank first came to campus and he worked in the College of Ed Med. So I mentioned the stable leadership that we've had from Dr. Hughes. She shared this with me and said it was okay if I said I was going to poke fun at her just a little bit, but the change and the wisdom that's evolved within her that she shared with us over the time. And then, of course, me and I feel like I might have been in a costume here. So maybe all change isn't so good. And maybe that's a theme that I play out here as well, is that sometimes we've changed and done some things and we don't always get it right. And we're okay with that. At least I am, right? Maybe I should have worn my costume. Okay. So the Lory Student Center was first approved in 1962. It was a group of students who led that charge for a facility that ended up costing. And I want you to pay careful attention in all of these photos to who's represented, who's not represented, what was the enrollment at the time, what were the demographics of the time, and what was happening in the world, Colorado and the U.S. during that time when you think back to the 1960s, right? So we call this the phases of the LSC, the original 7. We invited this 7 back to our celebration in 2012. That was the 50th celebration. This will come up again later in my discussion with you all. So Student Center was designed by James Hunter. This is a piece that came out of the Collegian at the time, and it was a $3 million facility that built first the LSC theater that we're in, and then the south side of the building. And when I talk about the phases of our renovations, you'll better understand why we renovated beginning with the south side, because this is the side that opened in 1962, having gone through construction. And here you see the Lory Student Center Theater, the facility that we're in, which was the performing arts center in the city of Fort Collins. So it had fixed seating. It had a stage that came out to the wall to the edge of this stage, and it was made for performing arts and somewhat of a movie theater, but it really wasn't set up for that because it didn't have a tech booth. It wasn't accessible. It didn't have an elevator to get up to the upper level. It didn't have gender-inclusive restroom in the back and in the front. It didn't have portable, movable seating, so it didn't need to because it was the performing arts center in the city of Fort Collins. So construction of the Student Center took place in 1960, 61, and then opened in 1962. And many of you have heard me talk about this quote all year. I use it in the orientation. I've used it in most of my remarks. I probably will stop using it when we get to the fall. And part of that has been the nostalgia that I've been reminded of through the Phase 3 renovation project and all of the phases of construction. But this was said by our first building manager, who was Ken McCafferty, who said, "A building is as a building does." And of course, if you've seen the orientation, you've heard me talk that a building doesn't do anything by itself. It's the people and the programs and the services that make it what it is, and has provided the Lory Student Center with the reputation that it has in how we serve our campus community. So this is where I zoom through a few photos. You'll see a view of the theater from the east side, so right from really the plaza, and the story of the theater is on the glass over there in the auxiliary art space to the Kerfman Gallery that describes the original design from James Hunter, was that the Student Center Theater looked like a Coleman camp stool. You can see it pretty well in this scene. So, yes, there was an ice skating rink out in the area directly north of us, so in what is now the Sutherland Community Garden. I had a chance to catch up with Dave Mack, who said, I skated on that. It was the late 60s, early 70s, and it lasted for a few years, but as we've felt temperatures rise in Colorado, that westward sun beating down on it, the ice rink didn't last very long. In fact, we dug it up when we did the Phase 2 renovation. So we dug up the metal system underneath that chilled the ice. So then we get the north end construction that happened in 1968. Again, students initiated a request to do that approval, increase their student fee, and added roughly 150,000 square feet to what was already 150,000 square feet on the south end of the building. And that same year, there was a beer in where students took over the LSC in response to a decision from the administration that we would no longer sell beer on campus. And so that lasted for a few days, and then the administration said, sure, we'll reopen, allow the Ramskiller to serve beer. It's a story that Jeff and Pete know better than I do. And that was the end of the beer in, but it still stands as folklore to, especially to ASCSU to this day. Remember, a building is as a building does, right? So in 1987, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Student Center, and there was a lot that happened between 1962 and 1987. And it's good because I think we just lose sight of what students and, of course, staff who were supporting students at the time, administration, faculty, and others. But you had the establishment of several offices that are critical to the mission of the Student Center because we can't serve our students in the way that we do without these offices. And that is, in 1975, you got the Community Service Office, which has led to, and is now presently SLICE. And I've left the original names of all of these, but the two earliest were Black Student Services and El Centro in 1976, and then you get Native American Student Services, and these are known as cultural offices, cultural centers today. Native American Student Services in 79, Asian Pacific American Student Services in 84, and I think I have a typo in 1985 there. And 1987 was the University Club. So 1997, I don't think any of us were here at that time, right? Was there, oh, John, you were here for the, yep, you were here for the flood. You may be the only remaining person, John, that was here for the flood. And I had to make sure I noted this, that more than the inventory that was lost was the hardship of the staff at the time and what you all did to get the bookstore ready with textbooks at the time for the campus to open by the fall semester. And then in that same year, ASCSU and SOGLIB, so the Student Organization for Gays, Lesbians, and Bisexuals, proposed that the university establish a GLBT Student Services office in the LSC. And that opened in what we called then the basement of the LSC. And that really, the flood still impacted that, and given there was a significant renovation as a result of the flood, that office was just opening about the time that I arrived to CSU. So I came in 1999. I think many times I've questioned, what am I doing here? What did I really say yes to? And I couldn't be more grateful for what has been a tremendous experience for me in the time that I've had and the privilege that I've had as serving as director of the Student Center. Early on, we formed ASAP, the Association for Student Activity Programming, that is now evolved into RAM Events. That was the first time all of the program boards on campus and operating within and external to ASCSU came together in a program board. And then we also revised the mission statement of the LSC for the first time as a part of the Mission 2000 group. So think about that, right? I said we had revised the mission in 2020. We had a mission statement that lasted for 20 years, and it was well past due that we updated that in 2020. And then we also updated the ASCSU Senate Chamber. That's the photo that you see here. That was the result of that renovation, where it was not accessible prior to that renovation to the lower, to the what they call as the floor. We added a lift to that area in thinking we were providing universal accessibility, and you still needed to depend upon a lift to get to the floor of the Senate, and that lasted for about 10 years. So not quite there in our thinking and our response to the needs of people with disabilities. So we also renovated the ballroom. That was one of the first things that I had a chance to do. Of all things, we lowered the ceiling, and part of that was because we had asbestos in the top. We couldn't do any attachment there. We had a limited funding base to do that, and I remember meeting with President Yates at the time, who said, "Mike, make sure our ceiling is not lower than the college on the western slopes." So I said, "Dr. Yates, that will not happen." And in fact, it was higher, but it was not the greatest move, and it's what the funding allowed us to do at that time. We go to 2004, and we established at that point in time that we needed a master plan that was going to drive the transit center addition on the north side. So keep in mind that that's when the plan was done, was in 2004. And so we did the first master plan. This began in 2002 with hundreds and hundreds of people that came through many facilitated discussions to help develop what I call as the first master plan, which led to that north end addition in 2007. So the intent was for the city of Fort Collins, who owns and still owns the transit center on the north side, was that they were going to build a standalone facility separate from the LSC. And we had said, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It was going to be where the weather station is. Let's attach it to the LSC. We'll manage and run the facility for you. Let's have a partnership in a unique way that doesn't exist on other campuses, which led to the building of that transit center. Yet another renovation. Part of that called for the renovation of the food court. We went from a centralized food court, one point of sale, to multiple points of sale. So that lasted for about 7 years. But you can see it was the beginning of the food court that we saw today, which was a pretty novel concept in college unions around the country. And most of them were having a single point of sale instead of multiple points of sale and turnkey operations in theory. The idea was that folks could come in as changing needs of students changed. We would be able to have turnkey operators come in and change those out. So, and you can see Taco John's lasted for about a year, and it wasn't successful. So, and that's because, the operations that happen in the student center are very, very difficult for us and for us and third-party providers to be profitable because they only operate 8 months of the year. So, and when they are busy, it's great. And we were faced with long lines and revenues are good, but it's just enough to get them through an entire fiscal year for us and those private operators. So we moved to deciding that we're going to begin to get ready for phase 2, and we update that master plan that's going to lead us into construction in 2012. And you'll see here that we have a canopy over the sculpture garden. At that time, it wasn't the Sutherland Community Garden. And we're in the facility that is portrayed here with the theater. You can see that there's no north side window that we cut into the facility. And as I mentioned, it had fixed floor seating, had a balcony that wasn't accessible, and a very large stage that was mostly unusable for the campus community at that point. We developed key premises that we wanted to base the renovation on. The first and most important one was universal design. We wanted people to be able to come into the building who experience disabilities to have a flat floor design, and that would lead us into the rest of the facility, including between here and the rest of the building, where again there was a lift that you had to depend upon to get to this level of the theater. And so we removed that to give people control over their own access. Students, I should have mentioned this in phase 1, pushed us as a university to seek a LEED Gold designation. We did that in the Transit Center addition in phase 1. the theater became Phase 2A, and they pushed us as well. Actually, they supported us at that point. There was no pushing. But I would say, and going back a little bit on that Phase 1, where that was not a priority of the administration. In fact, I think they were saying, why would you want to spend money to accredit your facility as a LEED designation? And I came to understand that it's like going through and getting a degree without actually getting your degree. You do everything up into that, which is mostly what the campus had been doing without anybody to check your results. So it was the accountability piece that was important. And that we would have a multi-purpose facility in the design here of the theater, given the desire to use it in many different ways. So this theater was Phase 2A, meant to offset, because we knew that the ballroom was going to be renovated. And that led to, in advance of beginning the rest of the renovation in the Student Center. And so we celebrated the 50-year anniversary. We dug up a time capsule in the Sutherland community garden, which was soggy and wet, right? It had been out there and was underground and mostly unusable, so moldy, slightly dangerous in opening it. And hence the placement of the time capsule outside of campus information today. So it's on the old ballroom floor, makes use of the ballroom slats, LED lighting, and the intent is that it would be opened in the next 25th anniversary. So remember the faces of the LSC, the original 7? So recognize a face or two in here with Ashley at the very center of this group. So we ran a sort of a essay entry, and we asked students why they love the LSC. They submitted essays. We chose 20 new students, frankly, because it was so darn difficult to choose, given what they had written about the Student Center and celebrating that group every 50 years. And so the intent is that in the next 50-year celebration, somebody, it won't be me, would choose the faces of the LSC again, who are to be celebrated and who were critical to the mission in moving forward. And so note it's larger because our enrollment is larger. It's more diverse. Our diversity of our student population was pretty much non-existent at the founding of the university back in 1870. And so trying to do a better job with representing the diversity of the campus that existed at that time. And I would say we still have work to do in this. So 2013 hits after that 50-year celebration, and students approve a $70 fee. I have the newspaper clipping. We did 100 or so presentations around campus with the Lory Student Center Governing Board. And the theme of seeking that approval, initially it was, well, it says our LSC and our choice. And once the governing board got a hold of it, some of you have heard this story before, they said, Mike, can we change that theme? You've got it all wrong, because it had said your LSC, your choice. And they said, you've got it all wrong, Mike. We want to change that. And they owned it, and they carried it out, and they said, we want you to approve and do everything that you're suggesting that you're going to do. We had thousands of copies in the Collegian asking students for feedback around actually 5 choices on student fees, beginning with 0, and then ultimately moving to a $70 fee increase that would lead to the $70 million renovation of Phase 2 and 2A. So the goals of that time were, in no particular order, modernization of the building. So we knew that most of it at that point in time was 50 years old, and that we were going to need to bring it up to code standards and accessibility and to better meet the needs of our changing demographics of students. And so I would say probably the most important goal was the co-location of the SDPS offices that I mentioned earlier that had come into the Student Center, but they had been located in various wings, very far apart from one another, with at the time, the GLBT Student Services area in the basement of the Student Center. It had actually moved up to the main hallway from basically what was a closet to a slightly larger space, but in very different areas. So it made it challenging for students with multiple identities to get to those offices. We said, let's put them at the heart and soul of not just the student center, but the campus. So very intentional in the location of those offices, again, as a critical part in our ability to meet our mission and ultimately that sense of purpose in helping all students feel that sense of belonging and connection at CSU. We also added the Student Disability Center and the Women and Gender Advocacy Center as satellite offices, knowing that they had other offices on campus. We evaluated, asked, and said, you want to be in the LSC? And the desire, for very good reasons at that time, were to leave those offices with their main office locations and other locations. And since the Student Disability Center has moved to an even better location, but determined, for example, that the testing part of the Student Disability Center just didn't fit with the mission of the Student Center and the noise that happens in a student center wouldn't allow for much of the testing that needs to occur there. So we expanded the ballroom by approximately, it was over 25%. We had sought a LEED Gold rating, and we determined that we just couldn't get there. It would have been another $5 million, so we did not, we would have had to cut off the Senate Chamber addition and the Kerfman Gallery. We didn't want to do that, so we made some hard choices. And then universal access continued as a key theme for us in the Phase 2 renovation. And that opened 1 year earlier than was committed to students, so we had talked about it happening in 2015. We opened it in the fall of 14 and impacted the campus community by essentially 1 year with 2 summers on the front and back to get us to being done when I think Tomina was roughly 16 months as that renovation time period. So what I love about this photo was the depiction that we had. It showed off of the plaza entry what it could look like, and then ultimately what it did look like and what it looks like today, right? Relatively close to what we see today. Again, I'm cruising through this, so hopefully you're writing down your questions, notes, things I should emphasize more, things like that you've appreciated about what I've said. So then we get to, again, the Phase 3 project was a part of that initial 20-year master plan and saying, let's finish this up. And so when we had built the transit center, we knew we didn't have enough federal funding to do all of it to the upper level, to level 300. We had built the elevator so that it eventually could be extended. That's what you see today. That was part of the plan. At the time, though, quite frankly, we didn't know it was going to be ALVS, but we knew we'd have an upper level up there and something was going to fill it. And then the leadership of ALVS and the campus said we need to do more for our adult learners and veterans students. And so let's put the addition there, sought approval. Frankly, that could have been a standalone facility, right? And would have made our adult learners and veterans, and that was evaluated, feel like they had their own facility, but it would have been separate from the rest of the campus community. Again, knowing that students have multiple identities, didn't want to do that, and settled upon asking students for a $12.25 fee increase to support the ALVS addition, which was about $10 million. And so we bonded for that $10 million. The project was supposed to cost $23.4 million. Today, having postponed the project in April of 2018, we were going to begin right after graduation. The project is 35% more and cost $33 million and some change. I'd like to spend more, but Jennifer keeps saying no to anything else that comes up. But right, it went from 23.4 million to 33 million at this point in time. So, right, supply chain, cost escalation, labor escalation, cost of bonding. The good news was we bonded early, made that decision about 1.5 years ago, caught the market when bond rates were low. That bought some of that scope back. We had money in our reserves to cover it. We received higher education relief funding, which replenished our reserves, which had been budgeted and set aside for the Phase 3 renovation. And it's allowed us to pretty much move on target and accomplish everything that we wanted to accomplish as a part of that renovation. So why do I share all of this with you? What are the lessons that I've taken away? And I think you may take away some things differently than I do. And that's why I want to hear from you, is what have I missed? So clearly, institutions of higher education and college unions, with the first one in the U.S. being at Harvard University, weren't designed for the diverse populations that we see today. So most college unions have needed to be renovated to better respond to the changes of our changing student demographics, including students of all marginalized identities and students with disabilities, where this facility clearly did not do that. The power of the student voice. You've heard me say over and over again that so many of these things would not have occurred, from the first student union at CSU to the approval of the Lory Student Center to pushing for SDPS offices, for pushing for the SOGLIB office at the time, so with ASCSU and other student voices. And notice I didn't say student voice. I think we'll often talk about the importance of the student voice, and it's hard to have a student voice, so there are multiple voices that we've got to be paying attention to. The power of planning. I often say, if you don't have it down in a planning, it's going to be really hard to accomplish. We've got to communicate this plan, make sure folks know about it. We're already doing that for the next phase of the Lory Student Center, with recognition of the process is as important as the plan, ultimately. And I'll share with you that this renovation has been really hard because we had a pretty extensive process beginning 20 years ago. We were interrupted in 2019 with that, and we still had a plan that had to continue getting us through to where we're at today. And many students don't know that process, and that's been hard. So I need your help in sharing that with them and indicating, we may have it right, and we've had to make some adjustments, and we'll continue to make some adjustments, which is in line with the obvious point is things change. And I can't tell you how often folks will say, are you done in the Lory Student Center, Mike? When are we going to stop changing? We are not going to stop changing. We are not done. We will continue to evolve and change with the changing student needs. And I would add our staff needs and the community needs. Even when we may have done something that didn't work, or we need to do it differently in the future, we'll do it again. And I'm okay saying we didn't get it right then, but we can get it right in the future. It took the commitment of you all and hundreds of student and career staff employees over the years to get us to where we've gotten today. These things don't just happen on their own, and they also take the support of the administration. It would have been easy for the administration to say, we can take the $5 million in HERF funds, not worry about replacing what you had hoped to do, and send it elsewhere on campus. Now, it's one-time funding, right? It wouldn't have gone very far. And we made a pretty convincing argument that we needed to do this on the north side, albeit 2 years later. And it's clear, right? Our work is hard. We work long hours, lots of expectations. That's the pressures of being a revenue-generating operation and a $35 million annual operating budget. And I think we love what we do. So, and I clearly see that in all of you, and I think our students, and what the data says to us is they know we love what we do, and we'll continue to see our work as challenging, engaging, and needing to involve folks in the process. So, a little bit about where we're headed. I'm not going to get into the details here, so I do want to make sure I have some time for the questions, but these are just some thoughts I've been formulating. They're not specific, but they are based on 3 areas of focus for us in the future. And the first one is no surprise to you. It's all about student success, and how do we ensure that students are being the best that they can be, and that may not mean at CSU, it may mean that we help them get somewhere else, but how are we supporting all of our students in their success? And these are in no particular order, that we're looking at administrative and operational excellence related to that theme of how can we do things better, efficiently, with an eye for the future, and that we do that with a better eye, and this is me, for creating an inclusive culture in which all of our employees feel valued and that they matter to the LSC. We'll put this presentation out for you to see and for others to share, but first and foremost, it's understanding our mission and our purpose and what those 24 words actually say and mean for us, and how we help students feel that sense of belonging, openly acknowledging and removing the barriers that hinder their student learning that a place like CSU was not originally designed to respond to. Seeing every single student as a leader. And I say here beginning with our student employees, but it really doesn't matter. I think we do a darn good job with ensuring that all of our student employees are seen as student leaders, and that's the experience that, and those of you that are here, I want you to hold us accountable to that. But that's true for every single student who comes to the Student Center. There is a leader in every one of them, and we have to help them tap into that. That we rely on data, which helps us understand the experience of diverse users. And so we've had an assessment coordinator in the building. We've had some transition. We are going back to that. And part of that is that we are challenged in that funding model to make sure that we've got somebody who's focused on that, but that's a conversation that Emily and Pamela and Jen and others have had in how we fund that, because we rely on and need to rely on that data that helps us build on strategies that will allow us to address that goal of student success. So in the area of administrative and operational excellence, so we've got to have the resources, right? That doesn't go away to be able to do the great programs and services that we do, right? It's coming from students and families, no matter how you look at it, right? We get zero from the state of Colorado. We get $0. In fact, we pay back to CSU $1.5 million a year for the right to serve students on our campus, to pay some of that administrative cost. And we've got to do that in an efficient way that allows us to provide a facility that's safe and that gives us the resources that we need to do. So DEIJ needs to be ingrained in the fabric of our decision making. For everything that we do, we've got to ask questions about who's represented, who's not represented, what are the barriers to their success, and how can we do it in a way that serves all of our students. Shared governance of the LSC will continue to be important with the Lory Student Center Governing Board that was established by the Colorado Ag Board at the time. I think Macy, who's the chair of the board, she'll be returning next year. I think she's online. Macy wants you to know that this is a commitment from us to work with you and other student organizations across campus in ensuring that the Student Center is meeting your needs. This idea that we are committed to free speech as a public institution. We have some different obligations than many other institutions that are private, some that have chosen to embrace free speech, and listening to the diverse perspectives that are offered there, and helping students engage in the dialogue that's required of that, and that we provide support for students who experience harm as a result of some of that free speech. So we can do both, right? It's not one or the other. And we've been very clear about that in our messaging, and we've got students who've missed a lot of that messaging in their high school years in the last couple of years, and so we've got to affirm and stand strong in supporting students and saying we will support the First Amendment. We have to. We have no choice about that. And that we have a marketing program under new leadership. We're grateful for Laura and the team that she's assembled for the return of Jill and others, but that we communicate all this in a robust marketing and communication plan. The last one that I'll touch on is that inclusive culture. for which our student and career staff employees feel valued, so that there's an opportunity for all of you to contribute to our shared mission to these goals, and that's why I'm asking you for your feedback on this. That we cultivate our strengths, and I am an appreciative inquiry guy. I want to focus on the things that you do well and support that and know what you can contribute to the LSC, and we'll find ways for you to do that. And let's build together on the areas that may not be our strengths. So that comes with the professional and personal development opportunities that are what today is all about, and continuing to do that in the future. Partnerships and collaborations are critical to how we do things, so anytime there's an idea that says we can partner on this, let's do it. So that we compensate employees both equitably and in a manner that allows us to keep the talented staff that we have and attract the talented and diverse staff that we need. And just a comment about stay interviews. Some of you may not know that we did this with all of our career staff. Provided an opportunity to ask employees why they stayed at the LSC, why they stay at the university. And so some of the outcomes of that, and we have more data to dissect on that for the individual areas, but you can expect collectively that we will offer, we call it the informal Fridays or Thursdays, whatever it is. We've called them gatherings for now. We'll be finding and pinpointing those for fall semester, more professional development and committing to your needs, and then improved communication that happens both verbally and in those informal gatherings, in a newsletter that marketing has agreed and determined that they want to take on in working with our HR folks. So probably the thing I want to say, and I gave a bit of a teaser about this, is what's next for the LSC. And we will be, again, developing an update to the next master plan, building off of what we've done, and the focus will be, it's time to go back and look at our changing demographics, the desire for the institution, not desire, but the reality that will become an HSI, and all of the populations of students that are important. So the focus of that plan, in my mind, is that we would take a hard look at the spaces associated with the SDPS offices and how we plan for growth in the future. And remember that planning process takes minimum of 3 years before you even put a shovel in the ground. So, and that's pushing it. And so, as I mentioned, we've been planting seeds already to say, we've got a $50 million project that'll happen in 4 or 5 years. Make sure you factor in that in the university's debt capacity so that we can begin to move in that direction as this planning begins to occur when we're done with the current project. So more to come on that. But I guess I share that with you is because, it's the legs of the stool that we got to evaluate how we move forward with that are around student success. They're around the inclusive climate that we create for our staff that ultimately supports our students, and we got to fund the project and figure out how we're going to pay for it without seeking to hit the pocketbooks of students and families too much with what we want to do in the future, whether that's paying off some of the current bonds. But we've got to have a long-term master plan that helps us understand where we're going with that. So. And we'll be putting that through the test. So with that, I'm going to stop because I want to provide us some more time. But Emily, do I have time for any questions or thoughts or feedback of things that I may have missed? So. I know we had some folks online too, so. Derek, you're standing. Do you have a question for me?
Not yet.
Okay, all right.
All right. Rachel, do we have any folks online? Zoom folks, get your questions out there. I saw some folks writing. Anyone? Questions currently? Just your doll, I saw you writing. Yep.
Sure. Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. It was great to see all the pictures throughout the years and just learn more information. So my question is, and it was on a couple slides before, but I wrote prior to this, is trying to be better about sharing those resources that we have, whether it's financial, staff, just different ways to be partners within the LSC. How do we go about implementing that? Because that's a very big concept, but then how do we go when times like, the bookstore rush is happening, so, John Perry and his staff might need some extra people to help out, or Slice is having a big event geared towards campus. So how do we better share those resources and like implement that strategy? Because I think it's great, but could be hard.
Right. I could punt, Jess, and say it's right. I mean, and this is true, that it relies on all of us to just step back and say, how might we be able to do this with other offices in the building? And I guess that's the kind of the quickest response consciously to ask that question of one another and to know that it's going to be important, and knowing right that we've made an emphasis on employee salaries, and that's for students and others. And so that also means we've had to, in some areas, we're not going to be able to add staff that we want to add. So we're going to be forced to look hard if we want to pay people more, and we know we need to do that. So we have to ask that. And so, I don't know, maybe we need to do that as a part of the work plans and say, where will you intentionally partner in ways that you haven't done before, both within the LSC as an organization and with our service partners who help us accomplish our mission. So I'm going to look to all of us to do that, because we've been doing this for 60 years now, and we can do it better, and we're going to have to do it better. So great question. And if others have thoughts, write it down on a card, and that may be a topic for our informal gathering and how we approach that. What else?
Anyone else want to ask a question? Who has questions on their card? Because I can grab them and we can answer a couple now, if that's easier. Yes.
So you talked a bit about we're kind of wrapping up that original master plan and looking towards creating a new master plan. And my question is about, are we continuing a focus on growth for the building and continuing things like more construction projects to help improve office space or whatever? Or is it more about kind of improving efficiency, some of the things that we already have, and trying to make them run better currently? Or is the master plan more about expanding growth, that kind of thing?
I think, and this is the beauty of a master plan process when we go through it, is having outside facilitators who come in and listen to the masses, to not just current students, but anticipating what future students need, hearing from all of us and our service and business partners about where we go, and still understanding that there's a massive cost of construction today, and how do we balance that with the cost that students are already paying, that is $200 a semester, both for debt service and operating in the student center. So that's what the process will allow us to get to. If I looked at, there's a set of standards that I refer to called CAS, the Council for the Advancement of Standards in Higher Education, and they do it by functional area. And we are mostly right-sized. In fact, we're slightly oversized to anticipate future growth of populations. The formula is around 10 square feet per student, which would, say we should be 320,000 square feet. We're actually 380,000 square feet. So there'll be some efficiencies that we gain, that we need to look at how we use spaces. And there'll be some addition, obviously, with the SDPS offices and how we push out and perhaps even up. But I'm not an architect, and I want to surmise how we get to there, and till we get the folks in who hear that that's an actual need of our SDPS offices. So, and we've heard, the question has come up lots of times. How are we planning, especially with new leadership, for where those offices go? Again, thinking 5 years out. So it's a great question, but more to come, and it's a process we'll embrace.
Rachel, any questions from Zoom? Okay. Juliet, do you have our last question?
just checking, do we still have a CSU global commitment? And also alongside that, have we ever considered having the international office at Lory Student Center?
Yeah, great question. So when you say CSU Global, Juliet, I'm thinking you're referring not to the CSU Global campus, but to international students, and right, because Global's the separate institution. But in the phase 2 renovation, we did work with international programs. We asked them what kind of space they wanted in the student center. The result was a smaller office across from back office. So as many of you know, that office was a satellite office, much like, based on what they requested, much like WGAC space, the Student Disability Center. And so they weren't using that space, and we said, let's put it to better use. So yes, it was a part of the planning that we did, and will need to be part of the planning again to say, how can we better serve our international students? Is that the place that we need to do it in the Lory Student Center? So yes, part of the conversation, and will require either efficiency in how we use existing space or adding some new space to serve international students. I would say too, regardless of how we do it, that the entire LSC needs to be serving all of our students. So it's not possible that one office serves our diverse populations, but it's up to every single one of us in how we do that. And sometimes space, right, is a reminder that we need to do it, but we don't need to be reminded, we should just do it. And so that's in all of our services. And that's especially true for off-campus students who make up the majority of our students. Off-campus life can't possibly serve in that small space all off-campus students. We've got to make sure that the entire LSC is not just the living room of the campus, but it meets all of their needs, including sleeping on a couch, to preparing their foods, to feeling comfortable. And that's true for all of our diverse students, all students.
Mike, thank you so much. I know, Maida, we have one more, but no, you're good. If you write that down, you'll be a good invitation. So if you write down continuously on the note cards, we will be collecting those. That way it can also be anonymous, and that content can help drive the future communications that we have committed to you, right? Be it via email, posted, and the informal gatherings that Mike talked about. Mike, thank you so much. Any last words from you?
No, just thank you again, and I appreciate all of you do, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into planning this. So, yeah, looking forward to the next few days.